Good afternoon, everyone. So just coming on, a little chat today. I was going to talk about something else, but I was watching a video, and it just kind of stuck with me. They were doing an interview. I was watching Sage Steele. She does podcasts now. Her latest episode, she was doing with, she was touring. I guess it would be a tour. She was touring the Museum of Glenn Beck, whom you all know. She was touring his museum in Irving, Texas, and they were, going over these artifacts, which I thought were wonderful and fantastic, that somebody can afford to get these things. And it got me thinking, because they were talking about people and the wonderful history that's not being taught in our public school systems about people, and how we have to take people as they are, both the good and the bad. And I was like, you know what? That makes sense, because, and it's not that I wasn't, but that makes sense because they brought as a point to that, they brought up the fact that about President Thomas Jefferson, and how people have been railing against him for forever. On the Declaration of Independence, only 2 states voted against, the prohibition of slavery when they put up, while they were doing the Declaration of Independence. They were talking about, abolishing slavery, and only 2 states voted against it: South Carolina and Georgia at the time. The 13 colonies. I'm sorry. Only 2 of the colonies objected: South Carolina and Georgia. Now, of course, the next question will come up. Well, of course, Jefferson was a slaveholder. Yes, he was. But you got to remember, he was a man of his time. There were a lot of people that had slaves, but weren't necessarily a fan of slavery. Now, why do I say that? Because obviously, it has been documented that he was against the practice. Well, then why didn't he just free his slaves? Well, during that time, you couldn't. Slaves were considered property. And so you can't just give them away. You can't just sell them. They're property. And so he was not able to do that. 1. 2, that even after he it's a process. So during that time, slaves were considered property. And because they were considered property, you just can't get rid of property, especially, and especially, for instance, it's almost like, how did he put it? He put it almost like it was like a bank loan. You can't just divest yourself of the loan, because you still owe the money. You still owe money to the bank. So even though you don't want to be in debt, you still have to pay back the debt that you incurred to that financial institution. Okay, and again, I'm paraphrasing the conversation, but it was an amazing thing to hear, because obviously none of this is taught in schools. That, for a man who had slaves, who was a man of his time, and a lot of people had slaves, especially in the southern part of the colonies. He wasn't able to divest himself of that due to circumstances and whatnot. And Again, that doesn't make it right. But what I'm saying is this, that people are, in a lot of ways, and I would say even most people are dualistic in their personas. What do I mean? What I mean is that there's good and bad in every one of us. Some are, the percentages are more than others, but there's always good and bad in everyone. So despite Thomas Jefferson being a slaveholder, and again, I'm not advocating in slaveholding, I certainly not. But what I'm saying is that even somebody who had slaves and was not able to divest himself of those slaves, also it's been documented that he was against the United States being in, against not the 13 colonies, soon to be the United States, of being slaveholding nation. Again, because the UK was, at that time, Great Britain. And so the Declaration of Independence was written to divest ourselves from them, and they showed us the original draft, or the working draft, should I say, not the original draft, but the working draft of the Declaration of Independence before the final copy was, printed and made. And when it says all men are created equal, the word men was capitalized. So what does that tell you? All men. Everyone. Because it was capitalized. Now, of course, depending on who you talk to, then they'll come out and say, oh, well, no, that's not what they meant, blah, blah, blah. Well, you don't know what they meant because you weren't there, but there's documented. They would literally wrote their notes on this copy of the Declaration of Independence that Mr. Beck had, that they had their notes on there. They had their notes on there. And it's just amazing to me. And again, I'm not saying, and again, I bring that example up because it shows a duality of people. Okay? That people have things in their past, and that the only way to learn history is to accept the fact that people have these dual personalities, or that they have these past sins or past issues, and that we have to learn to accept those, even if we don't like them, and even if we don't agree with them. That's part of who they are. And the problem that we have in doing that is that we hold people, even people in the past, we hold them to a modern standard, and we can't do that. We can't hold the people that lived in the 1800s to the modern 21st century standard. Society was just different. Society was different. And so for us as a modern people to hold these people to a 21st century standard is wrong. It's not appropriate. There's no way we can hold them to our standard, because life wasn't lived by our standard 200 years ago. About to celebrate 250 years. So 250 years ago plus. Okay? My great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandparents didn't live the way I lived. Didn't have the things that I have. Didn't have the resources. Didn't have the technology. Didn't have any of the things that I have. When I look back on my family tree, and I have an extensive family tree, a very extensive family tree, but just my direct line. When I look at that and I see how they lived, I've got it so much better than they ever would have even dreamed of. And I don't even think I've got it that great. I've got a, normal life. Normal, standard life. I'm obviously not rich. I'm not well off. But I'm able to take care of my family. I raised three sons that are now grown. I'm able to, keep a roof over our head and all these other things. But the way my ancestors lived, my direct ancestors, was totally different. I can't put a modern standard on people that lived back in the 1700s and 1800s. I can't do that. I can't do that. One, it's not right. And two, it's not appropriate. My 8th great-grandfather, came to this country as an indentured servant, which is similar to being a slave, but indentured servitude is more often than not voluntary because you're trying to pay off a debt. So the best way back in those days to pay off a debt was to go under indentured servitude. And then after however many years, you paid off that debt and then you were free. Well, that's what happened with my 8th great-grandfather. Came over from England as an indentured servant. Did pay back his debt. And then subsequently, after being free, bought land and helped found Amesbury, Massachusetts. That was a common practice in those times. Indentured servitude was a very common practice, especially with folks coming over from Europe. It was a common practice. Why would my 8th great-grandfather volunteer to be an indentured servant? Well, he had a debt to pay, or he really wanted to get to the United States, or something else was going on that right now I don't have that information. I have to ask my uncle, see if he knows. I'd be interested to know why he did it. But I know that he did come as an indentured servant. So my thing is that there are good and bad to everybody. My 8th great-grandfather might have done something in England that he had to run from. Or maybe he incurred a debt that he had to pay back for this gentleman that brought him over to America. Who knows? But I don't look at my 8th great-grandfather any less or more because of the good and the bad things that he's done. And we shouldn't look at people that way either, because we're too focused on trying to put people in bubbles and trying to, put our modern standards on centuries old people. And it's not right and it's not fair. We shouldn't do that. History has so many gray areas and stuff that we don't get taught. It's absolutely ridiculous. What did I learn today? The first person that died in the revolution was a black man. We weren't taught that happened. The first slaveholder in America was black. We certainly weren't taught that. That doesn't fit the narrative. We get on England for bringing the first slaves into America, but England wasn't the first country to bring slaves to America. It was actually Spain. It was actually Spain in, I think 1525? St. Augustine. People forget about St. Augustine. When I say to America, that's obviously a modern term, but to the North American continent. Let me be a little more specific. It wasn't Jamestown. It wasn't those type of things. It wasn't the Georgia or South Carolina. No, it was Florida. St. Augustine. People forget St. Augustine is the oldest, the oldest city, if not the oldest one of city in America. Not Jamestown. So, people don't look up nothing. They don't research nothing. They just believe the narrative. And we're all guilty of believing the narrative, whichever narrative that it is that you believe. We're all guilty of it. We're all guilty of the narrative, and we're all guilty of drinking the Kool-Aid, as they say. But we have to stop. And what I like about people like Mr. Beck and others who are giving us history that's not taught, who are giving us real history, documented history, people don't want to accept that. They just want to believe their narrative. The 1619 Project is a bogus. They talking about it was a ship full of slaves. No, it was a ship full of indentured servants. There's a difference. They need to get the story right. Yes, indentured servitude is essentially a form of slavery, but indentured servitude is a volunteer form of it because people are trying to pay back debt or trying to pay back whatever it is. And so the way to pay it back was to serve that particular person for however many years the contract stated. But that's not what they want to do. They want to give you the narrative that, it was a ship full of slaves, because that's what fits their narrative. And it's the wrong narrative. It's the wrong narrative, and it's not the truth. Wrong narrative, and it's not the truth. People, and you can't take what people say at face value anymore. It's a shame, but you can't. So you got to do your own homework, and you got to do your own research. So the simple fact of the matter is there's good and bad in everyone. And that's really the theme of this chat. There's good and bad in everyone, and we have to accept that. Doesn't mean we have to like it. We just have to accept it, and we gotta stop being so judgmental of people, because we have to understand people. That's the main thing. You have to understand people. You have to understand people, and people aren't as idealistic as you think they are. People have their secrets. They have their issues. But when you find out, you don't judge them. You don't judge them about what they about. You judge. I'm sorry. Let me rephrase this. You judge them on the totality of their life. I'm talking about historical figures mostly. You judge them of the totality of their life. You don't judge them on bits and pieces of things that you feel fit your narrative. No, that's not right. That's not right, and you shouldn't do it. And I think that's what's wrong with what's being taught in schools and everything else, is that they are trying to fit a narrative. They're trying to fit a narrative. And it's the government's fault in many ways. It doesn't fit the narrative. The modern theme of racism and all this stuff was started by Charles Darwin in his book. But we only get the first part of the title. They don't read the whole title. Y'all look that up. And then we idolize, which we shouldn't do with anybody. We idolize President Wilson. President Wilson was a straight up racist. Straight up. Straight up racist. But we idolize him. People idolize him. Again, you can respect the office, but you got to do your full homework on the man. And that doesn't mean we can't have a conversation or a discussion on him as a president. But you need to know the whole man so that you can get a true perspective on who you're talking about and who you're dealing with. People aren't what they appear to be on social media and in front of the camera and everything else. There's more to them. And you need to take the time out to find out what it's about. I'm not saying dig up dirt. That's not what I'm saying. But when it comes to historical figures and even people that are living right now, you know, as I keep saying, people are like a treasure box. All you got to do is open it. All you got to do is open it up. And you'll find that there are people are much more interesting than you give them credit for. Much more interesting than you give them credit for. And it's just not fair that we judge people by bits and pieces and not the totality of who they are. That's what upsets me. You know, it's not. It's just not fair to the person. It's not fair to you. So, you know, it's a shame. And so I wanted to talk about this because I just found it fascinating that something that's so commonsensical, and I'm just making up that word, you know, is not common sense. It makes total common sense that we need to judge people by the totality of who they are and not just the good and or just the bad. You know, he brought up President Washington. He's like, I couldn't find anything bad about him. So he went to the Smithsonian or to the National Archives and asked the curator of American history, hey, I can't find nothing bad. He's like, well, I got something bad about it. His own mother wrote an op-ed, I think, to the New York Times or something to that effect. And, you know, because she didn't want him running for a second term as president. And so she wrote an op-ed saying that, you know, he's extravagant and he spends too much money on ice cream. That's the only bad thing that we could get on President Washington. But it was something that you would never find in the classroom. Wooden teeth, lie. Chopping down a cherry tree, lie. All that stuff is made up, myth, legend, you know, all that stuff is made up. It's made up. But we found this one op-ed written by his own mother trying to dissuade the public for voting for him for a second term as president. Ain't that something? He didn't have wooden teeth. His teeth were ivory. He had dental issues his whole life. And basically they said that they found teeth. They weren't his, but they found teeth or they were made of ivory. And without anesthesia, they went in and drilled into his gums and put in those teeth with no anesthesia. One, that's crazy. And I've had several root canals. That's crazy. But that's the truth. That's real history. These are things that we need to know. These are things that we need to know. We need to know the totality of people, not just what we want to push as a narrative, whether good or bad. So the whole thing that I'm talking about here is stop pushing your narratives and let's find out the totality of people. Get to know people. Read about them. Read different types of sources. Don't just go to the sources that you agree with. You're not going to learn nothing. Just afternoon. Yes, it is. Almost the end of lunch, too. Yep. So, yeah, let's get to know people. Let's accept the fact there are good and bad in everybody. Everybody's got a past. Everybody, is not necessarily what they present themselves as in the present. Let's understand that and accept that. Stop putting modern ideals on past people. It just doesn't work, and it's not right. Societies were different back in the day. What we consider shameful and wrong and everything was normal day business back in the day. It was normal. It was the norm. But it's not the norm now. Societies change, people change, language change, everything changes. We have to understand that when we talk about people. We have to understand that what we consider abhorrent and evil and everything else wasn't considered that way back in the day in some cases. In some cases. I'm not going to say in every case. I'm just saying in some cases. In some cases, what we consider not the norm was norm back in the day. And we have to understand that. When we talk about historical figures and we talk about the past, we have to know the totality of what we're talking about. I'm just as guilty of it as anybody else. And again, I don't remember the whole thing I saw in that video, but I learned something on that video. And again, a lot of people don't like Glenn Beck because of his, I think they say he's a Mormon or something to that effect. I don't care. That's not why I listen to him. I listen to him, especially nowadays, is because he's trying to teach us history that is not being taught in schools. He's given us an insight on things that we didn't know about our own history. That's not being taught in schools. That's not being talked about in the media. That's not in our museums. He says something to the effect that if we allow the government to have all our artifacts, they can control the narrative. So he's an advocate of sacred American history being in private hands because the government can't control the narrative. So his mission, collecting all these artifacts and everything, is so in case the government tries to spew out a narrative that's not right or wrong, he can dispute it because of the mere fact that, no, I got the documents. I got the artifacts. They're right here. They're right here. So we just need to take people as people. We should not be idolizing nobody. We shouldn't be putting nobody on pedestals. We should take people as they are, give respect to the positions that they might hold. But as we all know, people have to earn respect. Whatever position and titles they hold have usually already earned their respect. So yes, we give deference and respect to the positions. That doesn't mean we agree with them. We just give respect to their positions. But we go and we do in-depth study on people and take them as a whole person, good, bad, indifferent, ugly, whatever it is. If we do that, we'll have a better grip on history, a better grip on a lot of things. And I think we'll be much better informed people. So that's all I got to say on that. I may talk about some more of this further along. But right now, that's all I'll talk about, just on my lunch, walking around. I apologize. I was supposed to do a video yesterday, but I got caught in a thunderstorm and got soaking wet and couldn't finish my video. So the sun's out today, so do that. Again, it wasn't originally what I was going to talk about, but it's all good. I just want to make sure I get on here and say something. Hey, leave a comment, like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. I appreciate each and every one of you. And if you have any comments, please leave them below. I'll always be respectful. But hey, if you got any comments, leave them below. Any subject matter you'd like me to talk about, by all means, let me know. But until next time, God bless you.